You know, maybe Donald Trump and his fellow Republicans should have followed poor Mick Mulvaney's lead. 5 days ago, Trump's acting chief of staff admitted, in front of everyone, a quid pro quo, saying the White House had withheld military aid to Ukraine in an effort to get Ukraine to investigate debunked conspiracy theories about the DNC in the 2016 election. He even added, infamously, the quote, "Get over it." The White House and Trump's Republican allies quickly disavowed those comments, and Mulvaney has spent the past 5 days desperately, humiliatingly trying to walk them back and tell us we didn't hear what we saw him say, because the line has always been no quid pro quo. Trump even had literally those words scrawled on his notes at a cabinet meeting yesterday, so he didn't forget to repeat them. You can see it there in Sharpie. No quid pro quo. With impeachment looming, this is the final place they have all retreated to, the place they've been holed up inside with the tanks out front, the no quid pro quo fortress.
Get us up to date on what's going on.
No quid pro quo.
No one believes there are any quid pro quo.
And what we do know is there was definitely no quid pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo here whatsoever.
There was absolutely no quid pro quo.
There was absolutely no quid pro quo. The transcript backs it up.
The transcript of the president's phone call with President Zelensky, where there was no quid pro quo, there was no pressure.
There was no quid pro quo. There was no issue about finally getting the military assistance.
No quid pro quo, as Mr. Mulvaney said. No linkage whatsoever between any type of security assistance dollars for Ukraine and any type of investigation.
There was no quid pro quo in the phone conversation. So no doubt that the haters are going to hate.
People who are trying to imply that the president is asking for things or quid pro quos, I think this is ridiculous.
Are you open-minded if more comes out that you could support impeachment?
Sure. I mean, show me something that is a crime. If you could show me that, you know, Trump actually was engaging in a quid pro quo outside the phone call, that would be very disturbing.
Oh, really? Well, then Senator Lindsey Graham must be very disturbed, because today Bill Taylor, the chief of mission of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, testified before Congress that there was an explicit quid pro quo, that he was told by the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, that, quote, everything was dependent on announcing an investigation into the Bidens in the 2016 election, including security assistance, which was the U.S. military aid that Trump had personally withheld from the Ukrainians. I'm joined now by Natasha Bertrand, national security correspondent for Politico and an MSNBC contributor. Also with me, Matthew Miller, former chief spokesperson for the Department of Justice and an MSNBC justice and security analyst. And Natasha, one wonders if they're regretting now so clearly leaning on the no quid pro quo talking point, even when the call notes themselves showed there was a fairly obvious one after today's testimony of Bill Taylor.
Yeah, it seems like they should have gone with what Mulvaney said, which is, okay, there was a quid pro quo, get over it. It happens all of the time in U.S. foreign policy. But instead, they were relying on what the president was putting out there, which was the only thing that was discussed within this realm was what the transcript showed, which was, I didn't explicitly say you're not going to get military assistance unless you investigate the Bidens. Well, I guess the Republicans weren't banking on the State Department employees and the career officials actually defying the State Department and testifying to Congress and telling them everything that they knew and found out over the last, 6 to 8 months about what Giuliani was doing. And this is also different and more explosive because for the first time, Bill Taylor has testified to the president's direct involvement in this.
Yes.
With the Russia investigation, it was very much people around the president who were interacting with the Russians, who were trying to get Russian help on this campaign. And the president was always kind of one step removed from it, disregarding his public statements. But in this instance, Trump was actually directing it. Trump was saying explicitly, according to Bill Taylor, that unless Zelensky makes this public commitment to investigate Burisma and the Bidens, then the Ukrainians are not going to get a White House summit and they're not going to get aid.
Matt, to Natasha's point, the public pronouncement here is so telling to me because it also vitiates another talking point that, there was which was always preposterous, there was a genuine concern with corruption. But it's a public announcement they're actually seeking. I don't even know how much they care about the investigations.
No, I don't think they cared about the investigations at all. They cared about the fact that Joe Biden was under investigation, not that the investigation would ever produce anything. It's a little bit similar, I think, to the Bill Barr investigation into the origins of the 2016 thing. It doesn't really matter what that produces. It just matters that they have a talking point that the president can use. I think the Republicans are in a little bit of a bind now. Look, they can attack Bill Taylor, but there are a couple problems with that. Number one, it appears that he detailed all of this meticulously. The direct quotes in his statement today appear to be from notes he kept at the time. Number two, I suspect we're going to see him in a public hearing, and it's hard to imagine, just based on the kind of gravity of the case he presented, that he's not going to hold up well and be very convincing. And number three, they are making a mistake if they think that he is the only witness that's going to come forward. Right. That's the mistake they made from the beginning, is somehow just taking the president's word for it, when it was, I think, fairly obvious all along that the president probably did everything that he was accused of doing. Now they're really stuck. I mean, I would think that if they were smart, they would stop trying to defend the president's behavior, and they have to decide, look, I mean, I am going to cut bait, or I'm going to cut the president loose on the propriety of his behavior, but if I'm going to defend him, I'm going to say it's not impeachable, because trying to defend all this just seems to me too much of a heavy lift to the American public.
Well, and it's also Matt brings up a great point, Natasha, which is that this is the first round of fact gathering. It's happening behind closed doors. We're getting leaked testimony from the depositions. There will be public hearings that will be carried live on every network, in which the person saying this will be saying it in front of America, and they're going to have to figure out what their story is before that happens.
Right, and they'll be saying it under oath, and the Democrats have already been moving very quickly on this investigation. There have already been almost a dozen interviews in the last month. They're going to interview more people over the next 2 weeks. People at this point, State Department and career officials, seem much more comfortable at this point testifying against the president and revealing things that have been happening at the State Department over the last 2+ years, because I think they see this president in a weakened position, because so much has come out with proof about what he asked Zelensky to do. And with regard to, other witnesses that Bill Taylor already has undercut with his testimony today, that's a whole other question, and that's another layer of information that Congress has gotten. Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the EU, he might be facing perjury charges. There was a Democrat on one of the committees who said that they may recommend that just because he may have misled the committee about the extent to which he knew what was going on behind the scenes.
Quickly, Matt, Bill Barr, again implicated here and mentioned. It seems crazy that he hasn't recused himself in any fashion.
It's crazy. There's something going on at the Justice Department. I don't think we know the full story of their involvement there. This is they put out another statement today. It was the 4th time they've tried to distance themselves from the president's actions with respect to Ukraine or with Rudy Giuliani's behavior. I suspect that we don't yet know the full story of why they quashed the criminal investigation, and that explains their nervousness and their jumpiness for the last few weeks.
Great point. Natasha Bertrand, Matthew Miller, thank you both for being with me. Republicans are quick to say that impeaching Trump will tear the